Hi everyone, welcome to the first video in quite a while where we're going to touch on the software I've been using for the last 30 of my videos. It's a free to download software for Android called Krita. I believe it's a desktop app, but I'm currently using it on an Android tablet. And the first tip is the fact that you can use Krita to animate. Again, completely free. All you need to do is click onto Windows, Workflow, and then Animate, and we can start our process. So once we're at this page, we can use the standard layering system like before, where I'm going to draw the foundational layer to plan my work. And all we're going to do is a bouncing ball. So as it bounces, it's going to lose energy and therefore not be able to bounce as high. I'm going to create a new layer, and this is to plan where each one of my images is going to take place. So I'm going to split this up evenly. And if I'm rushing into this, it's because I am terrible at making videos, but we're just going to work with it anyway, and hopefully I improve. So now that I have added a couple of key points, I'm going to keep on adding more between each existing one, and eventually that's going to bring enough images to create quite a smooth animation for our first one anyway. Just to put it out there, this is the first time I've ever tried to do animations, so it's not going to be great. But yes, this is the first way that we're able to use Krita in a nice and productive way. Now that we've got all of our points, we can start to draw our animation. Now, I've used previous animation softwares before just to like play around, and I never really got into it because they seemed either overly simple or overly complicated. I feel like this is the perfect gap in between. So what I've done here is I've created a new layer, which is my animation layer. And on each one of these cells, this is a single frame. I'm sure there's a better way to do this, but I'm clicking on every single one and clicking that single box in the center. And that is going to allow me to create an animated layer. And what that will allow me to do is add a new frame every single time. The underneath layers will remain consistent, but won't actually show up on the animation itself. Having these cells will also allow, I believe they're called onion skins, and that will show us which images in the animation are before and after the one we're currently on. So to do that, you have to click on the light bulb on the left, and therefore when you're going from frame to frame, you're able to see where your previous image is. If it's in red and if it's ahead, it'll be green, and we'll see examples of that in the future. Now clearly I need to get a lot better at this because I am rushing ahead, I'm recording my voice over the top of it, and it's not really syncing up. But I should probably practice speaking as I draw, just so I can take my time a bit more. I'm rushing, but this is just to get back into the flow of things. Now, as I'm drawing this bouncing ball, you'll see that I'm stretching it. That's because it's going to give the impression that it's moving with a bit of speed. It's a good way to practice it. The faster it's moving, the more stretched it will seem until it hits the bottom of the floor, in which case it will squash. And then quite elastically, it will just bounce back up. That's the impression that I'm trying to go for. So here I'm going to do a bit of a semicircle so that it's splattering on the floor. The next frame is going to do a lot flatter. And then we're essentially going to do the reverse. I realize this isn't the highest quality video, but if you happen to be still watching, Let me know if you'd like me to focus on these areas with more detail in the future, a bit more care, and hopefully it'll be a lot slower. So I decided how I'm going to be making content in the future, and it's going to be less frequent than every day, because after that I just got completely burnt out, especially while attempting to make videos and doing a full-time job. But what I'm thinking of doing is videos every couple of days, and I'm going to mix between practicing using this software and just digital art as a whole. Maybe one of the days every week I'm going to be practicing more and more in animation, and maybe another day I'm just going to be doing fundamentals of drawing just to build up on, like I did the first 30 days. I keep on working on that. Maybe if people are struggling with particular topics, I can focus on those. But yeah, just let me know. And we can move back to my current animation, where I'm just repeating the process. Honestly, if I spent a lot more time on this, I'm sure it would be better, but I really am just winging it. And hopefully it's going to turn out okay. Again, never practiced this before, so your guess is as good as mine. But obviously, because I'm recording my voice over it, I know how it went. Movie magic has disappeared. But as you can see, I'm still using my fat hand touching the screen. What I need to do is get a bit more delicate with how I'm using my tablet, and also learn how to use particular shortcuts. You notice at the top of the curve, it turns back into the circle. That's because if you throw a ball in the air, the top of the curve, top of the point, the highest point when you throw it, it technically loses all velocity before accelerating again back to the ground. Okay, so I'm just finishing up, adding more animation layers as I continue, because otherwise it won't actually count towards the animation. And I'm going to make the last one nice and flat, and make it so every single time it has hit the floor, it's going to do a little splash effect. And I'll just find the other frames where that's happened. It just creates more splashes like that. And you'll see as I'm going back into previous layers of animation, you'll be able to see both the previous layers and the ones ahead, depending on color, which I find incredibly useful. Very easy to do. This is free software. I suggest you just download it and go for it. It's a lot more approachable than other softwares I've tried in the past. And there we go. The frames aren't exactly consistent, but it looks like a bouncing ball, I think. So I'm quite happy with that. If I were to do this in the future, I'd put a lot more planning in place, take my time, and also calculate my frames. So let's say I know it's going to be 15 frames per second, that kind of thing. You can slow it down as well. Maybe it'll look a bit smoother, but that's essentially it. That's application 1. You can remove the layers and actually just see the animation like so. And honestly, I'm pretty happy with that for a first attempt. So that's your first way you can use Krita. Now, the second way is actually going to be using the selection tool. And to do that, we're going to go back to our default, create a new worksheet. And this is really to use for, well, selecting, but that means you can restrict what your brush is doing to your area of choice. So let's say I wanted to draw a circle with a triangle inside of it, and maybe that's going to be in a square. But what if we wanted to color a particular part of this without affecting the rest of the shape. To do that ordinarily, you'd have to be either incredibly precise or just make a lot of mistakes, erase the work, that kind of thing. So I know this is an oversized brush, but it's just an example. Yeah, you're going to make a big mess. However, what you can do is use the selection tool. We've got a couple on the left, and we're going to be able to be really specific with what we actually interact with. So the first one is the box selection tool, and for quite a while I didn't understand why it was drawing the box like this, but after a couple of failed attempts I zoomed out and realized that my entire page was a bit wonky. So I don't know if there's a way to correct that, but if it doesn't happen to be a flat shape that's parallel with your page, maybe use one of the other selection tools. So I'm going to correct that a bit and just redraw my box. And then highlight this with the box selection tool. So if we put this shape in the box and we use the same brush as before, you'll notice that it will only draw within the selected area. Now, to start coloring again, you actually have to select your brush in the top left. There you can see blue. But the next tool is the circle tool, same principle, but just for curved shapes. Now these are quite basic and they allow you to draw things perfectly symmetrical. However, we don't always want to do that. In fact, very rarely are we going to be doing that. So the next selection tool, we can create shapes. So we're going to basically touch each time we want to select a new point, and that will allow us to connect a lot of different straight lines to form a new shape. So if you tap on each corner of your shape, you should be able to join it up, and there's your new shape. I quite often use this to kind of go around the edge of drawings previously. It doesn't have to be a basic shape. You can make as many points as you want and even go around curves by doing a lot of different touches. But let's say we want to do a really random shape and we just want to create an outline of something. You can also do that as well. And honestly, coloring your base layers of your drawings, this is a really good way to do this. It just means that you're not going to be coloring outside the lines, and it just gives you a bit more sense of control and you can speed through it. So that is our second use of digital art in Krita. Hopefully that made sense. I hope. Let me know if not. Our third way to benefit from Krita is by using groups, layers, and alpha inheritance. So essentially, whenever you open a new worksheet, by default, we have a background. But if we hide that, turns out everything is transparent and we're just layering things on top of it. And I don't understand it fully, but if you add a layer on top of another layer and you can draw over the top of it, if you hide the alpha inheritance, which is the A on the right here, you will only see what is drawn on the top of the layer below it. So because we have no background, the only thing we can draw on top of is that green circle. And if we do another layer on top with this teal color, depending on what alpha inheritance we hired, it will only draw on top of something that already exists, like so. Technically, if you hide the green layer and you only show alpha inheritance on the red layer, I think you would just see a straight line. I suggest giving this a go, playing around with it, selecting and unselecting a lot of layers, but this is really useful for when we're adding different shading to groups. I should have learned about this a lot longer ago, but turns out I'm learning it for the first time with everyone watching now. So if I make any mistakes, please correct me. But I'm clearly not very practiced at creating groups, but I'm going to try and use this technique to do a sphere. So I'm going to do a grey base circle. I'm going to add a layer on top of it. And then I'm going to do the shaded area. While I scramble around these groups, I would definitely be doing a new video purely on grouping because I'm such a noob at this. But we have this layer above the initial circle, I think. Again, very new to this, and if I can end up doing this, that means anyone here can as well. So I'm going to select a darker color, and it doesn't matter if I go outside the lines. I'm just going to give the impression of shading around the edge here. And then I'm going to do an additional one and add a bit of light. And again, I'm going to be completely going over the lines. Doesn't really matter. And then if we hide the alpha inheritance on these two shading and light layers, it will only show the values added on top of the base layer, like so. And then we can go one step further, add a layer underneath this to create a shadow layer, keeping them all independent. And this will just level up your drawing ability like so. It'll make things a lot easier. And my advice is name all of your layers, because the more complicated your picture becomes, if it's a portrait or a bit of scenery, you're going to want to know the name of every single layer. So when you try and find them, it's a lot more organized. I can't recommend that enough. Let me know if I succeeded on this third use of Krita. If we add a quick layer behind it, it really makes it pop a lot more. It looks a lot more refined than if we're just sketching all these shading, trying to keep within the lines. We can really control what we see and what we don't see. And there we have it. Kind of looks like a marble, to be honest. Quite happy with that. So there's tip 3. And tip 4. Tip 4. What was tip 4? When we're drawing faces in particular, we always think it looks perfect, but proportions might be off. It's very difficult to know just by drawing it. So we're going to learn how to flip the image. And I'm not sure what the button is on the screen for that, but I know for a fact the shortcut is by pressing M for mirror. Now, because I'm using a tablet, I had to find my keyboard and plug it in just to click M. But please, please tell me what button I need to press for this to happen, because as you're drawing, I suggest you constantly keep flipping back and forth to see if the proportions are correct. It's the easiest way to figure out if there's any errors. And that's tip 4. And the fifth piece of advice used in Krita is, here we go, tip 5. Just explore. There's a lot of different functionality on here, and the best thing to do is just to play around, make mistakes, click on buttons, just get more familiar with the app. You'll get more comfortable, and I know when you initially download it, it's big and scary, but the more you play around with it, it gets smaller and simpler. That's probably the most important piece of advice. So thank you everyone for watching. I know it's been a bit bumpy, but in the next coming days, I'm going to be going through each one of these a bit more detail. Thank you and goodbye.